channel.
Welcome back, we should actually say, to History's Theories of Planning the Future, and we'll be taking you through episode 7. This is your favorite book review channel, which you might be familiar with.
Today we are filming the 7th episode, entitled Insurgent, the Act of Special Justice.
Okay, so in this book review today, we have our live studio audience here, guys. Can you please welcome our audience?
Thank you guys for the audience.
Thank you guys for coming to this filming of this episode. So today we're going to talk about insurgent planning. So guys, please tell me, what is the word that you think of when you hear the word insurgency?
Revolt? Definitely rebellious.
I'm thinking protest.
Revolution.
Okay, I think of a lot of violence. So what we're going to do today is we're going to teach you guys and also our audience what insurgency is really about and what insurgent planning is really about.
Okay, I and Dashni are going to be taking you guys through the first chapter of this book, and it will be based on the histories of planning theory, and there are 8 fundamental histories of planning theory, but we are going to be focusing on only 3 of them, which are going to show you the gradual change of how planning theories have been till insurgent planning.
And we picked those 3 because we feel like they're the most important and they've sort of paved the way for insurgent planning.
So the first one I'll be talking to is rational comprehensive planning. So this is a modernist planning approach, and as we know, that modernist planning approach speaks mostly to the built environment, and it emerged during the industrial period, which is between the late 19th century to the mid 20th century. So rational comprehensive planning it relies more on planners, architects, and engineers. So it doesn't incorporate community involvement in the planning and in the production of planning theories.
Okay, so the next one that we've looked at is advocacy planning, which emerged in the 1960s. And the reason that we've chosen to look at that is because it was one of the first forms of planning where there's sort of a little margin for public participation, and that's very important to insurgent planning. So advocacy planning was formulated by Paul Davidoff, who was a lawyer and a planning scholar. And it is a form of postmodernist planning, so it's classified, and it's also classified under the participatory strand of planning. So public participation is encouraged for the first time, as I mentioned previously, and there's a distribution of planning services in low-income minority neighborhoods. So if anybody's seen Erin Brockovich, that's an example of advocacy planning. So the planners are physically located in these neighborhoods and they represent the residents. So they're advocating for the residents. And the aim was to ensure that all people are equally represented in the planning process by advocating for the interest of the underprivileged and seeking social change.
So coming to the very most important planning approach, which is radical planning when speaking to insurgent planning. So this is a stream of urban planning which seeks to manage development in an equitable and community-based manner. So it is advocated and written by Greber and Haskins, who argue that planning is elitist, centralized, and change-resistant. So they proposed a new paradigm of a planning system that is of a system change that is basically decentralizing planning and facilitation of human development. So when speaking about insurgent planning in relation to radical planning, insurgent planning builds on a radical tradition or planning approach and planning theories. And it was first founded by John Friedman, who's the father of planning. So John argues that there are large inequalities in the political system and bargaining processes between groups that results in large numbers of people unorganized and unrepresented in the political system of planning.
On to chapter 2 now, and this is basically and this is titled, What Does Insurgent Planning Entail? So insurgent planning occurs when the residents try to reclaim the city. And one of the biggest misconceptions of insurgent planning and insurgency, as I stated myself, is that it is violent and extremist in nature, and in fact it is not. It certainly has the potential to become violent if the plights of the collective aren't heard, but it is generally characterized by going against the status quo. So this chapter provides more insight into what the term insurgent planning encompasses, and we have come to understand that insurgent planning is an emerging theory that looks at planning practices carried out by collectives in opposition to oppressive policies. Insurgent planning, much like other forms of radical planning, places great emphasis on inclusion and participation. There's an interesting play between inclusion, participation, citizenship, and domination. The notions of inclusion and participation are subject to a particular spatial and temporal context, which often tend to shape the way those notions are understood. In terms of the global south, Farana Murtab has pointed out that insurgent planning is essentially radical planning practices which develop in response to neoliberal specifics of dominance through inclusion. So we think that it is important to highlight the way in which citizen participation articulates with neoliberal dominance. Firstly, we must understand neoliberalism as a network of policies, ideologies, values, and rationalities that work together to achieve capital's hegemonic power. It is much more than a simple set of economic policies that extract surplus capital. As an ideological project, neoliberalism relies on legitimation and citizens' participation of what inclusion is. Perception, not participation, sorry. In order to achieve hegemonic power, a good illustration of this would be the commodification of water. So, water privatization policies are created to do more than just achieve economic efficiency. They are created to relay the idea that it is your civic responsibility to pay for basic needs. This creates a new perception of what the responsible citizen is required to do in order to play their role in society. Inclusive governance, or at least the farce of inclusive governance, supports this system, and serves as a means to mobilize society, to stabilize society. In order for the state to maintain its dominance over the people, it requires the people to believe that they have a say in the matter and that they have some degree of power over their lives. However, it appears as though an expansion in people's political rights creates a simultaneous erosion in their access to livelihood resources. The case studies that follow in the subsequent chapter will elaborate on this and provide examples in which citizens reclaim their city, and that's going to be covered by Mufulwe and Rita. So insurgent planning practices are essentially hegemonic, transgressive, and imaginative. They are, counter-hegemonic. They are counter-hegemonic in the sense that they destabilize the normalized order of things, so working against the status quo. They transgress time and place by locating historical memory and transnational consciousness at the heart of their practices. They are imaginative in promoting the concept of a different world as being, as put by Dr. Rodney, both possible and necessary. Insurgent planning practices also tend to move across invited and invented spaces of participation, where invited spaces here refer to the grassroots actions and their allied non-governmental organizations that are legitimized by donors and government interventions, which aim to cope with the system of hardship. The invented spaces in this case refers to the collective actions of the disadvantaged or the afflicted, which directly confront the authorities and challenge the status quo. In this sense, we have come to understand insurgent planning as something that is fluid in nature and is capable of engaging in both formal and informal political arenas. So one of the main takeaways from this chapter for me was the importance of historicized consciousness. So basically the material power of Orientalist imagery in literary text, and art to further colonial domination. And so insurgent planning, scholarly debates and readings and stuff expose the role of Western urban imagery in enforcing exclusionary cities and citizenship. So I think, we can go to the next slide.
So we're just going to play Steve Biko's video on Black consciousness,
Yes.
where he advocates for.
Can I just mention that I feel like it's important that our audience should know that insurgent planning isn't mainly about a profession. You don't have to be a professional planner to be an insurgent planner. You don't have to be a professional planner to be insurgent in any type of way. Insurgency comes in many forms. You can be a feminist insurgent, you can be a black consciousness insurgent, and yeah.
We see a completely non-racial society. We don't believe, for instance, in the so-called guarantees for minority rights, because guaranteeing minority rights implies the recognition of portions of the community on a race basis. We believe that in our country there shall be no minority, there shall be no majority, there shall just be people. And those people will have the same status before the law, and they will have the same political rights before the law. So in a sense, it will be a completely non-racial egalitarian society.
But will the vast number of blacks, after all their experiences, be able to live a life without giving vent to feelings of revenge, of
yes, we believe it is the duty of the vanguard political movement which brings about change to educate people's outlooks. I mean, in the same way that blacks have never lived in a socialist economic system, they're going to learn to live in one. In the same way that they've always lived in a racially divided society, they're going to learn to live in a non-racial society. They've got many things to learn, and all these must be brought to them and explained to the people by the vanguard movement, which is leading the revolution.
Can I just say that I really enjoyed the point that you made about the fact that it's more about the action and less about the actor. So it doesn't always have to be community-based, but it's really the people taking the power back from the sort of the top-down system that usually exists. So we can see that everybody looks like they're falling asleep. So we're going to play a game. We're all going to play a game now, and it's so much fun because everybody loves word searches and prizes from word searches. So we're going to give you a young, because it's an ad break now, right? So we're going to give you a young 10 minutes to find as many words as you can on this list.
Kidding, I would say.
As before highlight something since we are talking about we are our topic is insurgent planning, but what we are trying to emphasize on insurgency is not only within the profession. So what we are trying to do one of the things that you guys are going to find these ways, we are going to see how we in particular way that is how it relates to competitive. It doesn't necessarily have to be like a incentive game, but it can be like any form.
Okay, so we're going to give you guys like about 5 minutes to try to find like as many words as you can, and then after the audience will be able to participate and tell us what they think.
Yes.
You find all of them.
Yes.
These people, they're cheating. India.
Like that.
Can we get our prizes now?
Amy, you are cheating. I'm only calling.
How? Can we get our prizes now?
Take me next.
She onwards. It's because they're all one way. Yes. Shame. Shame, shame, shame. Want some help?
No.
Should I help you? I'm done.
You're the liar.
What do you have?
I don't care.
The group that presented yesterday.
Yes. Give prizes.
The twist is, there is no prize. I'm kidding, I'm kidding. There's a prize.
Against you guys, so it's just relax. Are we all together? Cameraman, camerawoman. Camerawoman, camerawoman, cameraman. Camerawoman, cameraman. And then you get the dance, social dance. You're ready.
Where's the prize?
Are we ready?
I could have just
Can you please speak one word and tell us how it links to insurgency?
Any word.
Okay, let's go with participation. And I'll go with the fact that you guys have already mentioned that this is a shift towards like a bottom-up kind of planning where the communities involved in creating the spaces that they feel like address the issues that they have, and yeah. Yes.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Okay, can I give it to them? It's not yours.
Dominic, do you have anything to say? No? Michelle? Okay.
Is inclusion, and I heard that she is speaking about how it's a way to promote inclusion. I think inclusive communities or something with inclusive governance.
We'll give you the prize, Amy. Not mine, it's you were correct.
Amy? Is there any word that you can link from the word search that you just did?
Maybe imaginative, because you have to come up with new ways and new strategies of planning, not use old ones.
Can anyone link the word?
You don't want knickknacks.
Neoliberal to insurgency. How would you guys link those two concepts? Amen?
I would say it's a step away or a renegade or neoliberal system that we are forced to enter. And it steps out of that and plans for something different.
Kiki, since you were so excited for a prize, can you let us know how the word consciousness relates to
Consciousness. Okay, towards the end, before the game time and before the Steve people interview, you and Darshni both mentioned how there's a lot to insurgency. Insurgency can be spatial, can be how you perceive feminist movement, how you perceive different aspects of life. It's a radical shift and change in life. So it comes with a lot of consciousness, knowing, being aware, and also being out.
Thank you.
Do you wanna link probably hegemony? So hegemony is in dominance.
Hegemony means dominance.
No, hegemony is sort of like a hierarchy of political power.
Okay, in some link it in two ways, right? So I'll relate it to gender first, and I'll relate it to race on dominance. Looking at the past presentations and this time linking them together, I think we've been talking about the seat of us seeing that cities have been mostly dominant of males rather than women. So insurgency might be an opposing theory which says that females should be included into the kind of feeling that we have. And that goes back to race because firstly, black people were on the outskirts and limited to stay there, not to live in the cities, of which is what we are seeing. First because said firstly, you mentioned that people should learn, they have learned to live in the apartheid cities. So even they change, that's the thing that we have. I think instead it's about changing of living there, then coming to live in the cities. That mixture that we have. Yeah.
Okay, it's so interesting that you mentioned that. Just for anyone that didn't know, the reason why our presentation is the 7th episode is because, as you guys know, this is the 7th presentation that we had. And so we're trying to show you guys that all these topics in a way relate to each other. They all have a form of insurgency in a way. They all link together. So this is the 7th episode to this collab.
Last one, maybe just pick a race. Okay, maybe bottom up. Okay. So I think since we have to start, okay, let me take bottom up and participation. We have to start there by the people, not from the politicians coming down, but actually look at what the people want. What do the people need? And then from there we go up, not from the politicians in the way and then going down.
Chapter 3, challenging the status quo.
Yes. So now we're going to be basically discussing a variety of case studies. So I started with case studies challenging status quo as sort of meaning of insurgency. So now I'm gonna take you guys through different movements that we felt were insurgent. So first movement is going to be Christmas.
as Black people, excluded from the education system for such a long time.
This is a special moment for me, as I symbolically assume the Vice Chancellorship of Wits University. The big universities, the ones with brand value, the ones where the elite used to go, increase their fees by double digits. The logical thing to do.
Were we going to accept the increase, or were we going to fight? And we were clear that we were going to fight.
You must give us free education, that's what you want in South Africa.
You want a more just society, you want a dignified society, and you want a decommodified university.
And that is why we are fighting for free education.
And if we leave here without doing that, we will have failed as big students.
The Fees Must Fall movement came about organically. It belongs to everyone and no one at the same time. It just felt like a disgust and disappointment with a government who would shoot its own children.
We knew that this is actually a game to break us.
They said I gave breath to the struggle. In some senses, they're right. I did.
No one can stop an idea whose time has come.
Yes. So that was Fees Must Fall. So that's how students and probably lecturers and the society to some extent decided to challenge the status quo. As we all know that Black people have been excluded from the education system. They've been excluded from the education system for the longest time. If we can all remember what happened during apartheid, so Black people went through your bound to education system. If you guys knew anything about that, and because of apartheid legacy and poverty, not a whole lot of Black students or Black people can afford tertiary education. So now in this instance, the students decided to fight for free education, and they also decided to fight against fee increment because they felt like they could no longer afford increasing fees. So this was the fight against institutions. So institutions as in universities and colleges, and the fight against the state because the state is able to provide free education. So that's the status quo that we're talking about. And there's the quote that I like, that I felt like it's so insurgent, that said, "No one can stop an idea whose time has come." So now we're gonna be looking at another movement which is known as the Me Too movement.
I want to thank Harvey and Bob Weinstein.
I would like to thank Harvey Weinstein.
Harvey Weinstein, who believed in us and made this movie.
Harvey Weinstein.
Thank you, Harvey Weinstein.
And God. Harvey Weinstein.
He left the room this time. He came back fully naked. Am I gonna... I mean, is he gonna rape me?
Gwyneth Paltrow did it. Renee Zellweger did it. Charlize did it. He's like, it's very simple.
They know if they don't do certain things, you ain't working again.
Because you heard the stories of like, don't be alone with Harvey.
More than whispering. I mean, the first time I met Harvey, he came in very aggressive. He said, what have you heard about me? And I said, I've heard you rape women.
It was allowed to go on because he had so much power. If he was some schmuck in a mailroom, he would be in jail.
Nearly 60 women now accuse him of misconduct ranging from sexual harassment to rape.
He victimized everybody.
We're all sitting around every day, we're wondering who's next. There will be glass broken. Well, there's no time for due process because the public is the judge and jury.
24 hours later, the Me Too tweets are in excess of 1.2 million tweets from women around the world.
All right. So now, looking at the Me Too movement, so the Me Too movement was basically movement against sexual harassment and sexual assault. So it basically began to spread in 2017 on social media as an attempt to demonstrate the widespread prevalence of sexual assault and harassment, especially in the workplace. So this was basically followed by allegations against Harvey Weinstein, who was basically known as the king of women. So now, what this movement did on the global stage is that it was able to put out allegations out there on social media against some of your most powerful people in your media industry, your corporate industry. So this was how the movement fought against the status quo. So looking at so we're going to look at other examples as well. We are all familiar with Marijuana massacre. So with the Marijuana massacre, our status quo in this case, they were fighting against your Lone Mill, your Impala, your big corporate, your big mining companies. So now, what people were basically fighting for, they were fighting for your better working conditions, your better living conditions. As you like, if you know anything about mining towns, in most cases you get people living in informal settlements close to where the mines are, and they were also fighting for better wages. If you guys still remember their famous demand to earn 12,500. So this was one of the major insurgent movements. So Select is gonna talk about other movements as well. So these are Cape evictions.
Evictions can also be linked to expropriations, and especially is one of the insurgent movement that has been happening in South Africa as a result of apartheid, and some people are benefiting from this neoliberal or capitalist system. So explaining these case studies, I feel like it is necessary for you guys to understand. When we are talking about the insurgency, there is supposed to be a status quo, which is this oppressing or maybe not serving the interest of the people. They have to be like those people who feel like now they have to take like action, they have to take matters into their own hand, like revolt against like this status quo. Like it's like I have stated like in this like a particular situation it's like Cape Town residents of which like they are in need of like of shelter. They are in need of land and like of which they were depossessed by the the previous apartheid government. And like now what has happened is that like they decided to take matters in their own hands by a movement called land grabs, whereby like wherever they find like a vacant land, they take this land and like they build their structures. It's like lifting, but like they really need this. Like government is not like paying much. It's not like it's not invested much into these things, more like it's treating it as a privilege, but to them it's not a privilege, but it's actually a need. So like here we also, like as I've said, like it's land grabs, land expropriation.
Well, we're actually standing on that vacant piece of land which residents want for houses. And without wasting any time, I do have a resident here standing by to explain to us how dire the situation is in terms of the need for housing in Rwanda. Thank you so much, Sisi, for joining us. Can you just quickly brief us with how desperate you are to get houses? Because we understand that this piece of land does not belong to the community, but you're adamant that you want to build homes on this particular piece of land.
Thina singabahlali balapha elwandle. Ekugqibeleni singabahlali abarentayo, abahlala kwi-backyards, abadiniweyo kurenta i-500. Umhlaba kudala siubona uhleli ungasetyenziswa, but at the same time kuthiwa umhlaba ngowomlungu, umlungu lowo singawaziyo. Into eyenzekayo ke ngoku thina into silwelayo ngulo mhlaba size kuwo apha. Enye nenye eyenzeka elokishini thina singendawo. Njengoba nisibona singaba bahlali bagcwele apha, into esiyifunayo thina zi-backyards sidiniwe kukurenta. Into esiyifunayo ngulo mhlaba, sicela sikhululelwe lo mhlaba.
I'm going to ask my colleague Zaid Harris to just pan and show you while I try to translate what this lady was saying. Right across, well, actually on the same piece of land, we see a private security here standing by. We understand that they have been conducting evictions on this piece of land since the protest started, and they're just standing by there in the event that residents do continue to erect some structures, which we've seen. I'm sure you saw behind me, there was a structure that they're already starting to build. So basically what this lady was saying is that they are backyarders who can no longer afford to pay rent, and so because this piece of land has been vacant for a number of years, and so they feel that they need to take matters into their own hands by starting to build homes here, and they're adamant that they're not going anywhere. But I must also mention that right at the police station we also saw some Somali nationals who are basically looking like they're seeking refuge at the police station following reports that some of the Somali shops were looted, and also we heard that a minibus taxi was also hit, and which is why some of the community leaders were there conducting meetings with the minibus taxi bosses here in Rwanda.
The people around you, Ati, say they want to set up homes on this piece of land. At the same time, this land is apparently owned by a private individual. What is the solution then?
That seems to be the case in many vacant pieces of land in the Western Cape. However, we do understand that Ellen Wendy from the provincial government is here. He will be speaking to us because often you do find that they are owned by private people. And so what these residents are saying is that government needs to then approach the private landowners to be able to buy the land off from them. But I see some resident here who wants to say something. What would you like to say? Come closer.
Okay, into yenzeka apha iminyaka mininzi, it's about 2009 2008 kudala ivakabhiji yathi kudala apha kodwa yabekwa apha kodwa mali elibala eli kufakwe isikolo phaya but libala eli alipheleleyo eliya kodwa mali yenzeka apha kwazi unikwa thina noba siniki umhlaba asinikwa mbani into yenzeka kwahlala ezindlini zabantu siyarenta 500 leya kayicingi lonto leyo come from far away kodwa abantu bafika ngexesha levoti bazosinika umhlaba kodwa irongo lonto leyo kodwa mininzi imihlaba ekhoyo lapha sensisho sizinto into yenzeka ntoni laa nto ebona ngabana kufanele umuntu wabela umuntu ngomhlaba wakhe olapha emhlabeni kodwa ukubana ngabana le nto siyenzayo emhlabeni izawungathi thina si-wrong kodwa asikho rongo thina kodwa umhlaba lona fanele umntu uza emntwini ngomhlaba lona ulapha le hoki ayongxaki le hoki lenana umzekelo sizawuvota ngoku kodwa bona bayazi bathi masenze umhlaba siyabulawa thina apha bayeka abantu bananga babule kwindawo ethi asingendawo silapha emhlabeni thina funa indawo zohlala yayibona yayiva kanjani nabo abantu bane-estate abantu bangapha ngabelungu bane-estate bangapha kodwa banawo umhlaba wona sawuthini thina abantu bamnyama.
Thank you so much. So basically what this resident is saying is no different from what this lady was saying that they're not going anywhere and that they're adamant that they will be continuing with their building process here. However, you have the anti-land invasion unit standing by in the event that they do continue. I'm going to ask my colleague again if he can zoom and show you that there is indeed a structure that's already erected here in this particular piece of land, and they are saying that they will continue with the building process, and whether the red ants come back here to evict them or to put down their structures, they're adamant that they will continue building.
Atintongana in Lwandle Strand, thank you.
Like basically what the lady is saying is not so different from what I've said before, because just like this neoliberal system came about, it was shown to be it's a free market where everybody can then participate, but they cannot benefit from this. It's they don't have means to participate within the market, so that it benefits them. It benefits them to such an extent that they literally cannot afford the basic needs shelter and shelter. Hence they are protest against the land.
Yes, so continuing with some of the silent movement, I wanted to look at something that is currently happening now in Hong Kong, which is the umbrella movement. So we So there was a clip of umbrella movement, so that's how they basically protesting. So they're using umbrellas and whatever, they're using rocks, they're using whatever that's necessary for them to advance their movement. So what basically started the movement was the extradition bill. So now how the extradition bill would work was, so the extradition bill would make it possible for the citizens that are living in Hong Kong to stand trial in mainland China. So now the problem is the citizens of Hong Kong don't understand their trials in mainland China because they feel like China is oppressive they feel like China is undemocratic. So now the scrapping of this extradition bill was one of their main demands. But now the movement is still happening, even though the extradition bill is being suspended and scrapped. Some of their demands now they basically fighting for what we call greater democracy. So there could be a bit of democracy on how they get to elect their own leader. So now, of course, I've already talked about all this movement. So I want to know how do you guys feel like social media or Twitter actually? Do you guys feel like Twitter is insurgent? Yes.
I feel like in a way to a limited point though, because that's how most of our movements end up starting. Because if you take the women, the men are trash and the whole rename thing, all these hashtags start, for example, on Twitter or on Facebook or wherever, where someone's voice is heard by someone, then we all end up hearing that one voice and we actually end up understanding where it's coming from. Then it goes from that to something that is actually physical, like very direct, than passive.
So do you feel like its power lies in like the reach, like the number of people you can get to, or like the freedom to say, like be free to write whatever on Twitter?
I mean, as much as there's freedom, but if, for example, you are only followed by 2 people and what you're saying isn't like relevant for all of us, you've posted it as much as it's free, no one else cares about it. You can write 10 more posts afterwards, no one else still cares. But if you've got the voice and you've got the followers and you post something, it becomes relevant to your crowd and the people who are who actually understand what you're saying or who relate to what you're saying. So it's in the majority. The power is actually within the majority and basically majority, because even if you had followers, the followers are the majority.
Anyone who wants to add on that, it can be anything, either Twitter or Facebook. How do you feel like you decide anything?
Insurgency and social media. I think social media is a great platform expressing insurgent ideas. We're maintaining that trajectory of movements and concepts and ideas and change. I don't see it sustaining itself. It needs to be an action that happens on the ground.
So you're saying it has limits?
Yeah, it's got its reach. It's like a speakerphone in a way, but I don't think it's going to present material change.
Would you agree that the issue is that at some point the hype starts to die down?
Becomes background noise.
I just think that I agree with that the both have said, but also social media can actually be quite dangerous, because it's like people, when you want to advance yourself, you know that there's this certain movement, for example, currently happening in South Africa now about men and the rape and stuff like that. You know that you're better someone and you just want to advance yourself, and it's easy for you to actually ruin someone's career and someone's life over lives by just posting about it and just say, so and so did this to me. And you know in actual fact that it never happened, So it has this reaching the masses and starting the whole movement, but it to a certain extent how people use it is not the way that is how they use current situations to advance for their personal things. It's dangerous and can end people's lives and ruin people's lives. And I think that maybe before but there's no way of controlling
what a person writes on Twitter is it's like a free space. You write whatever you want to write. So I think to a certain extent, it's a very good way for us as the rest of the world to know what things that are happening outside of South Africa and outside of Africa, but it also means people's lives.
And I also think, just to build on that point, that opinions are, sorry, not opinions, agendas are very important here, because exactly like Annalisa is saying, that you can, it becomes dangerous, I think, when you push for the wrong sort of agenda, but what is really the wrong agenda?
I mean, also, I feel like propaganda is also a problem that we suffer with, like, in terms of insurgency and social media. I mean, just currently with the current xenophobic attacks that we have going on here in South Africa, a lot of the videos and a lot of the content that you would see on those attacks were all things that happened in, like, the attacks in 2008 and 2016 and stuff like that. So I feel like people trying to use social media to try to be insurgent, as you say, like, it's also the agenda. They're just trying to, like, make their point even more, but I think it's a disadvantage in a way.
Okay, can I ask a question? Okay. Thank you for three of you for connecting, but like as they said, firstly, the point by the minister and questioning about this pushing the wrong agenda or the good agenda.
You want to what?
I will ask a question, but I have to comment first.
Okay.
It was basically the fact that power actually comes from the majority, usually.
Yeah, and the thing of like having two followers in this. So the way I see this, I will ask a question of who does insurgency prioritize? Because here there's a person who's having two followers, and he says what he says in social media. It can be effective towards of who does it prioritize. Because it's shared because of the movement of people trying to make an agenda, they go towards that side. So they go what they want to prevent, so they prioritize that movement so that they can benefit. So if, let me say, yes, I have two followers, if I post something, because I'm unknown, nobody will hear my voice unless it is being posted by celebrities more and more, or by elites, you see. So I want to ask, like, who do you think does it prioritize the media? And there's another thing you said, propaganda, the false information that's being media or insurgency. It's both of them. Like you say, media is insurgency, right?
So I'm gonna let the audience to want to respond.
We're gonna answer your question, but we just want to hear like the audience's
I feel like with the whole idea of prioritizing, it also goes to us having to sometimes understand that at which level are we looking at the problems from. So if, for example, there was an international problem of maybe poverty or whatever, then we've reached that there's no poverty anymore, then there's two people out of the whole country who are crying that the situation and poverty has affected the climate. We've reached the main point of the majority. As much as we want to try and reach on every single one's problems, there is going to be the minority or sometimes the majority that isn't reached. So it also depends on the actual agenda of the country or of the person or of the people, or what are they aiming to work towards.
Annalisa?
I mean, I think social media specifically is like one form or one method of insurgency. But I also think that it goes to like saying that the media in general, who do you think it was made for? Do you really think it was made for you as a marginalized person? Do you think it was made for you to actually benefit from it? So it's kind of like, yes, it helps, but to a certain extent. Like Sina said, if you have two followers, the chances of you getting a greater mass of people are very slim. But to answer into this, who do you think, like, does the person with two followers going to benefit from the social media? Chances are zero. They're not going to get the masses that they're supposed to get. And it's just like, I know with the whole Sudan massacre, how I got to know about it was when people that I follow, the people that I follow that follow me on Instagram started reposting about it on their status, and I wanted to know what's happening. So if the people that follow you are not interested in the same things that you are interested in, it's also another problem.
I don't know. I don't kind of agree with the whole interest thing, because I mean, with the whole Sudan time, even if you're interested in something, similar like that, it's something that you just come across. You know what I mean? I don't think it has to do with like if I follow Darshni, if we're interested in the same things. Because you know, there's these friends that you have that you just follow because you're just friends. Like it's not like you guys like each other's content like that much. You're like that much of a fan or anything. Like you just. But I mean, I feel like social media to an extent does give people that aren't on like maybe a political level or like a very high level of platform to speak. Because I mean, there was, for example, the whole the rape things that have been going on recently, like with the after the passing. There are people on Twitter that were like exposing a lot of people, even though, as you say, people do use that as in a bad way. But I mean, it is a way for people to know. And like, I feel like if there wasn't social media, we wouldn't have access to such information that we have now.
Don't you think that that's because the easier way to get that information is because of the hashtag something. So you know that it's trending.
It's a way that communities work together.
That's what I'm saying. That like all I'm saying is that if you have 2 followers and you want to start something or you want to express it, chances of you getting the greater masses are very slim. But when there's a hashtag that's already trending, it's easier for people to actually see because of the trending hashtag.
I agree with you. I agree with that whole if you have 2 followers, like not as many people are going to see your thing. But I still feel like social media does work for like the community, because I mean it's for the masses. I mean a lot of the masses can like come together, create a hashtag, and then it's that part of our culture.
Like also I think maybe if social media stops the whole cycle of bullying, then it would save people in our society.
Okay, like guys, before I go into show, like, are you going to give comments or is it questions? If it's a question, could you please like write it down? Because like now we are more on the schedule. Okay, both of them.
Oh, we just want to give 2 more people to share their thoughts so we can.
Can we have one more person?
Okay, one more question.
I just have a comment. As much as it is a platform for good, it also opens up a platform for hate. And I guess it's cyberbullying becomes very apparent. People hate in the world, and they have a voice. It becomes this kind of polarizing situation, social media, where, it's really, that's the negative dark side.
Okay, Francesco.
Beyond hate, also can be used like by militant groups to like recruit people. I think
like terrorist
organizations.
So now, you still want to say more?
Yeah, I mean that could be like those are also movements which start which are recruited from people which are recruited from people online. But that's in the same way that it could be like polarized for good people, for like good movements and for like hateful movements. Yeah.
So like for a closing question, we actually have like questions for you, but we just keep them coming over time. We actually wanted to ask if like there are any like insurgencies or insurgent movement of which like within the state, we didn't talk of it. And like if you are to say like this is this is like act of insurgency, like what's the status quo? Who is it like? Who is fighting against it?
Just any collective working against the status quo. And we've actually found that it's much more common and much more, it's very common. It's not even that it's outdated or that it exists in a particular time. It's continuously ongoing. And I think it's because people are becoming much more conscious of a lot of things, that they're starting to question things and be like, hey, well, why is this and this and this happening? And why aren't we thinking about this sort of thing further? Why aren't we thinking beyond what we are sort of conditioned to think? Yeah, so it's really, really many things. And it doesn't have to be something that's violent, like I was saying at the beginning. It can be something that is doesn't have to be in your face. It can be quiet, it can be low key and working through the system, but it's making a difference and it's making waves, and not just about violence.
Anyone? Who forced you to take it? Who was challenging
One of the taxi drivers is what Jesus said was challenging status quo of the system. What were you doing?
What were you doing in the morning? How was your life from home?
From home.
That's a very personal question.
Okay.
Okay, guys, I think before we move on to the next chapter of our book, it is important for us to give you guys the input from a professional insurgent planner. Chapter 4. Chapter 4. Challenges and implications.
Again, welcome back. Now we go to our chapter 4 of our book review.
Yeah, and chapter 4 talks of challenges and implications. So I'm going to be talking to you guys about the implications of insurgency when discussing radical planning. When we're discussing insurgency, when talking about radical planning policies, it's important to know that it promotes social transformation, right? And it also disrupts the attempts of neoliberal governments to stabilize personal relationships through inclusion. Insurgent planning reads through the bluff that neoliberal governments tell us, that they try to include citizens and stuff like that, which is the anti-colonial and anti-apartheid struggles, so through the bluff of modernization in South Africa. Also, once again, it's important to note that insurgent planning is not just about the process of planning, and it is not also about, it's not just about a specific actor in planning, but it's about the process of planning. It's about the process of trying to achieve social transformation, social inclusion, trying to achieve that bottom-up approach of including community members when forming areas, stuff like that. It strives to have equity planning, participatory planning, and as well as community planning. So communicative planning, sorry about that. So basically, insurgent planning looks to bring together communities and bring together people to try to find equitable ways to try to live together as a community, and also have everyone's input and not just have an important political member saying, okay, you need this, you need this, you need that. Mainly just having people talk about their issues and stuff. Also, this type of planning shows how urban developments take place every day in informal ways, such as squatter citizens, determined poor women, illegal immigrants, and other marginalized communities through the development of infrastructure and houses, and also other people that are involved in democracy and involved in trying to democratize, that's the word, their community. Marginalized people take into their own hands these challenges, such as housing, neighborhood, and urban development. They try to establish shelter and earn livelihood outside of formal structures, and it's outside of trying to find a way in professional planning to do that. For example, street vendors, they try to they try to earn their livelihoods in a way that is not formal. So for example, companies such as Pick and Pay. Most of the time, professional planning tries to include these big neoliberal businesses instead of trying to include community members. Community members that try to strive to have their own businesses. Community members that try to build for themselves instead of just building for someone else using their own funds.
Okay. Yes, thank you. So you're asking me about
insurgent planning, and in what way am I an insurgent planner?
Yes.
Yes, so I would say as an insurgent planner, one would try to see planning through the eyes of not just end users, which would be individuals, but collectives, so what we tend to call communities, how people collectively are affected by our planning, and by looking at planning from that side, to then critique planning, not only critique planning, but do something about it. So as an insurgent planner, I think what I have had the opportunity to do is work with community organizations, community-based organizations, representatives of communities, and understanding how they are affected by planning, and then trying to, in some way or another, become involved. And it has involved, for instance, in the Slovo Park community, an informal settlement, that is, of getting City of Johannesburg, for instance, to shelve a formal plan that Urban Dynamics, a planning firm, had come up with and had actually already taken through approval processes. That was quite a, I think, an insurgent kind of planning intervention from, it was myself and Neil Klug in the school, together with a group of human rights, sort of a human rights organization, SERI, that had been accompanying this community for a while, but in the task team meetings, we were able to critique this plan to the point that we finally convinced the city to shelve the plan because its implications for the community would have been detrimental. They would all have had their shacks and houses demolished, and they would have had to move somewhere else, and only some of them could have moved back to a layout plan that was actually not very beneficial for them. But that's not a comfortable thing to do. It takes a lot of courage. One kind of questions whether one is actually even allowed to do that as a planner. Are you allowed to critique your colleagues' work in that way and actually get their work shelved? They still got paid for their work, but so we went through, there's certain dilemmas, but ethically, if that is your ethical framework, I think we're required to do that. We are required to critique and take action. Yes, and I think as an insurgent planner, I also occasionally submit commentary on proposed legislation, did an extensive commentary on the land use scheme, the new City of Joburg land use scheme, which in my view was not SPLUMA compliant because it leaves out informal settlements, doesn't mention informal settlements at all, whereas SPLUMA actually says all land use management schemes have to incorporate innovative ways to make sure that informal settlements are gradually integrated into the urban fabric. And to my horror, although I had submitted this formally through the formal channels, no changes were made, and the approved land use scheme is still the same. So now, as an insurgent planner, I still have to do something about that. I will have to contact the city and make probably a big issue of it. I'm thinking of writing an opinion piece, maybe in the paper, to expose the issue and to raise more awareness. Because as an individual, you don't achieve much. As an insurgent planner, we were able to do this work around Slovo Park's plan because we were involved in a process and we were actively part of a process. There was a collective, the community agreed with us, the human rights lawyers agreed with us, and that backing helped. As a lone voice, you don't get very far. So insurgent planners tend also to work with social movements, to work collectively, to work collaboratively. And I think another example is a few of us in the school are involved in debates around urban land reform. And what we've tried to do is, wherever possible, insert our ideas into the formal channels. So there was a high-level presidential panel on land reform, and luckily one of us was invited and we brought the others in and kind of submitted a collective submission on that. And now, because we've done that, we also asked to be on other panels and so on. And we're also going to have a discussion here, by the way, on the 23rd of October in A1 at lunchtime about urban land reform. So that's another example. Okay. So your second question was about the community. how can professional planners, I think you were saying include communities in insurgent planning, was it that?
Is that the second question?
Yes.
I think I was trying to understand whether I might have misunderstood what my reading was telling me, but I was trying to understand whether planning professionals, like professional planners,
Yes.
are required to
be insurgent.
Practice insurgent planning.
Okay.
Or is it do you require a member of a community, or not too sure?
Right. So I think the last we want is that insurgent planning becomes a tick box. Because yes, planners are required to do community participation. And as we know, it often just, as in the case of Slovo Park, meant that Urban Dynamics had a mass meeting in Slovo Park where they passed this one plan by everybody. Do you want housing or not? This is the plan, yes or no. People of course said yes because they do want housing, but they didn't understand the plan at all. There was no alternative plan. There was no reasoning as to why this, oh, you've got dolomite, that's why this is. We are professionals. When we plan, we make sure this is a good community for you. There you are. Here's your plan. Do you want it or not? People said yes. And in the next task meeting, and they all following task meetings, they kept saying, well, the community approved this. We did participation. The community is happy with this plan, so that box is ticked, and now it goes to the next approval, which is in the city, and from there it goes there, and then the plan is approved. And people in the community didn't understand that plan, didn't understand the implications that their houses, a lot of them had built in brick, their houses would be demolished, they would not get compensated. They would have to move out of that settlement into a transit camp somewhere, very uncertain whether ever they would get back, who would get a house. Many of them don't qualify for a subsidy, they would not get their place back in that community, in that area. The last thing you want to go around saying is that all planners should be insurgent, and you have to do it, because that means that's the way they will be doing it. They will not it will just reduce the wood. So I think insurgent planning, by definition, is alternative planning. You can only have something alternative if there's a mainstream and there's an alternative. What we, of course, try and do in the school is make sure that all students that come through the school have an ethic of insurgency, and that they would want to question mainstream planning. And in their practice, whether they're a government official or whether they're a consultant, to find ways of ensuring. So if I were the consultant appointed for that Slovo Park doing the work that Urban Dynamics had done, there's nothing that it would have stopped me as a planning professional to do this in a participatory way with the community, to run workshops with them, to make sure that in my budget that I submitted in the first place, I included time to do all of that, and not just tick the box. So I think that's very important, that more and more planners kind of believe that that's the way to do it, and start doing it that way, but not because it sort of has to be done, but because they really feel it's what they want to do, ethically inclined to do. Just an example of a government official at City of Joburg who's insurgently within the housing department. He's not a planner as such, but I think it would be very similar to a planner doing this, is trying to get the department in itself to work in a more participatory way, in a way that allows informal settlements not to be disrupted, and reading the policy in that way, but facing a whole lot of blockages. All the other officials are seeing it the other way and don't want to be involved in communities and whatever, And there's one person who's trying to turn this around from inside, and I think that's a very, very important insurgent role that someone's playing inside a government department. So there's no thing like saying, if you're an official, you can't be an insurgent planner. If you're official, you're bad. If you're community-based, you're good. No, and a lot of people do very bad stuff down in the community level. You can be very patronizing. You can be very, not really truly insurgent. Or you can link up with the wrong people in the community. All these things are very. You need a lot of, what I want to say, you need a lot of careful reading of the situation to do this insurgent work properly. You have to be careful in terms of who you work with, to local level, always aware of the politics that go on in communities and so on. So it's not a simple, easy thing, and that's why our planning degree also includes courses on the politics of governance and so on, you know, on community participation. It's complex stuff. It's not just something you just go in and do. Yes, and then you had another question, and this had to do with the invented and invited space and how communities do insurgent planning from below across these spaces. And again, the Slovo Park is a nice example because they did a lot of protesting initially, and then the elders in their community were saying to them, guys, you're not achieving much doing this, you know, you're inconveniencing the wrong people. You know, the government officials are not inconvenienced by the fact that you're closing the highway down there. And so they started reflecting on their own approaches. And they've insisted on the statutory invited spaces to be opened up properly for them. And so the task team that was set up, that is supposed to meet monthly and has for a while met monthly, is actually a statutory an invited space. But if it hadn't been for the insurgency of this community, that space would have just again been treated as a tick box. So there was that community went through the court even to ensure that the statutory process was done properly. And I think there's a very, very useful lesson from that for communities, especially when these invented spaces, protest after protest, are not actually achieving much, you know, are leading to more and more infrastructure being damaged, schools burned down. It always also attracts the wrong people to these protests sometimes. You know, angry people with rightly angry but doing the wrong things, you know, hard to. So once that Slovo Park community decided to go through the courts in order to unlock the invited spaces properly, the statutory requirements of the state to make sure that that is done properly. And that in this case was to make sure that an in-situ upgrading process, the upgrading of informal settlements program was properly implemented. And that involves a lot of participation, so that the task team was necessary, and the task team includes the community, the community's representatives. And again, that was contested. Other groups came and said, but we the representatives. And the city then had to have a community mass meeting in which they then endorsed the SPCDF. But then through the back door, somehow this alternative group kept coming back into the meetings. And we assume corruptly so, in the interest of some officials maybe, or the councillor, we don't know. Perhaps, again, pushing for a particular agenda that would kind of mean a particular contractor ultimately would get to do the job, but then would be kicked back. We don't know. But it was a very difficult to read kind of context that even played itself out in the invited space. And so this insurgency is something that's, you know, we had to be there all the time reading these politics and trying to counter some of them, saying the right things at the right time, supporting or undermining where necessary. So it's a long-term commitment. We've been in this process since April 2016 that the judgment was passed, and this task team is still sort of slowly progressing, and we don't know for how long, so we have to remain committed. Which also means that, of course, is always difficult if you're a planning professional, you've been commissioned to do X, Y, Z in a time frame. But we actually are convinced that if Urban Dynamics had known what they should have done from the beginning and done this properly, we wouldn't be sitting here in 2019. You know, that process would have run smoothly with all the correct invited spaces properly. So I just want to say that, yes, communities have to sometimes push for those invited spaces to be properly opened up, and at times they have to use the invited spaces. It was just an interesting example of how that worked in Slovo Park. Good.
Thank you.